Hey, my name is Corbin. I live alone on the edge of the stony grasslands and endless sands where the sun drags itself across the mountain peaks like a lazy dragon, and rain is nothing more than a fairy tale told to children in the distant villages. Day after day, I tend to my scrawny goats, my stubborn horses, and the shallow well that threatens to run dry every time the drought stretches on. I chose this solitude because it's quiet. And quiet is the only thing I have left after everything else was taken from me. Years ago, I was a border guard, patrolling the fringes where human lands meet the orc territories. I saw too much blood. Too many friends fall to axes and arrows and skirmishes that never seemed to end. The war between our kinds simmered like a pot left too long in the fire, boiling over now and then into raids and ambushes. I lost my family in one such raid, my parents and younger sister gone in a night of flames and screams. After that, I walked away from it all. No more uniforms, no more orders. Just this patch of barren land, far enough from the villages that no one bothers me, and close enough to the wilds that I can pretend the world doesn't exist beyond my fence. My days are simple. I wake before dawn, check the traps for rabbits or lizards, anything to supplement the thin gruel from my dwindling grain stores. Then I water the animals, mend the fences that the wind and sand constantly erode, and haul water from the well. That well is my lifeline. A narrow shaft dug deep into the cracked earth, lined with stones I place myself. It's never full, but it gives just enough to keep me and my beasts alive. In the evenings, I sit by a small fire, staring into the flames, remembering faces I'd rather forget. Sleep comes hard, broken by dreams of battles I never wanted. That afternoon, the sun was beating down like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air into a shimmering haze. I headed to the well as usual, bucket in hand, figuring I'd spend the evening hauling up enough water to last through the night. The goats were bleating restlessly and the horses stamped their hooves in the corral, but I chalked it up to the heat. As I approached the well, I froze. There, slumped against the wooden fence just a few steps away, was a massive figure. Green-gray skin, long black hair matted with dust and sand. It was a female orc, bigger than any I'd encountered during my guard days. She lay on her back, chest heaving with ragged breaths, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Bruises ringed her neck, dark and fresh, as if she'd been in a fight or worse. I didn't gasp or shout. Years on the border had taught me to stay calm in the face of the unexpected. She wasn't moving much, just shallow breaths that spoke of exhaustion. Her clothes were torn rags, remnants of what might have been warrior garb, and a broken spear lay discarded nearby. No weapons on her now, but her build screamed strength, muscles like coiled ropes, hands that could crush stone. I should have backed away, maybe grabbed my old sword from the house. Orcs and humans didn't mix without blood being spilled. But something held me there. Maybe it was the way her eyes fluttered, half closed against the sun, or the desperate hitch in her breathing. She was dying, plain as day. Without a word, I lowered the bucket into the well, the rope creaking as it descended. The water was cool and clear when I pulled it up, the best I had, untainted by the dust that plagued the surface pools. I filled a gourd dipper and knelt beside her, careful not to touch her. Her eyes snapped open, sharp gold, like a predator's, weighing me in an instant. No gratitude, no fear, just calculation. I held the dipper to her lips. She drank slowly at first, then greedily, water spilling down her chin. When it was empty, I refilled it. 3 times I did this until her breath steadied and color returned to her face. She pushed herself up then, towering over me, even as I stood. She must have been nearly 7 feet tall, her shoulders broad as a barn door. Those golden eyes bored into mine, memorizing my face as if deciding whether I was worth remembering or killing later. Then, without a sound, she turned and strode toward the rocky hills, her steps uneven, but determined. She vanished into the red dust haze, leaving me kneeling there with the empty dipper, a strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was something else, like I just tipped the scales of fate without knowing it. I shook it off and went back to my chores, but the animals were uneasy that night. The goats huddled together, bleating softly, and the horses paced in their corral, snorting at shadows. I lay on my pallet inside the house, the wind howling through the cracks in the door, carrying whispers that sounded almost like voices. Sleep evaded me, my mind replaying the encounter. Why had I helped her? Instinct, pity, or just the simple truth that in this wasteland, denying water to anyone was as good as murder? Morning came with a chill that seeped into my bones. I rose, splashed water on my face from the basin, and stepped outside to check the locks on the corral. That's when I saw it. The valley around my home was encircled by hundreds of orc warriors, armor glinting in the dawn light, weapons at the ready, clan banners fluttering in the breeze. They stood silent, forming a perfect ring like a noose drawn tight. No shouts, no charges, just watching. My heart pounded, but I didn't run. Running would be pointless. An older orc detached from the line, regal in his scarred face and red cloak exuding authority. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the well. He pointed to it, then mimed drinking. I understood immediately. This was about the water I'd given her yesterday. The orc woman I'd saved had brought her entire clan to my doorstep. That morning, with the orc warriors encircling my valley like a living wall of iron and muscle, I forced myself to move as if nothing had changed. The sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows from their banners, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had animals to tend to, water to haul, and a life to maintain, even if it felt like the noose was tightening. The older orc, the one in the red cloak who seemed to command them all, had made his point clear with that simple gesture toward the well. This was about the water I'd given her, and now I was caught in whatever web that act had spun. I started with the goats, scattering what little feed I had left in their trough. Their bleats were louder than usual, eyes darting toward the horizon where the orcs stood motionless. The horses snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing the tension in the air. I murmured soothing words to them, stroking their manes, but my own hands trembled slightly. How many were there? 200? 3? Enough to wipe out a village, let alone one man on a forgotten farm. Yet they didn't advance. They just watched, their golden and green eyes tracking every step I took. As I moved to the well to refill the buckets, a lone rider broke from the line. It was her, the orc woman, from yesterday. She looked transformed, no longer the dying wanderer, but a figure of authority. Her green-gray skin gleamed under polished armor etched with tribal symbols, her black hair braided tightly in warrior fashion. Her face was painted with bold red streaks, marking her as someone of rank. She rode a massive steed, twice the size of my horses, its hooves kicking up dust as she approached. She dismounted with a fluid grace that belied her size, stopping a few paces away from me. I straightened, meeting her gaze without flinching. Those golden eyes held the same calculating intensity, but now there was something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice deep and accented, the words rolling like stones in a riverbed. "Daughter of the chief of the Stone Grey clan. I crossed the wasteland for 3 days without water or fire to prove my strength to the ancestors. It is our rite of passage. I fell, and you gave me water from your own well. By our laws, that is a great debt." I stayed silent, dipping the bucket into the well again. I hadn't helped her for any debt or reward. It was just human, I suppose. Or whatever was left of humanity in me after the wars. But she continued, her tone matter of fact, as if explaining a simple truth. "My father does not trust your kind. Humans have spilled orc blood for generations, as we have yours, but the debt stands. For 6 days, my clan will remain here. We will watch you. If you betray us, call your village guards, flee in the night, or sell us out, we will know. Prove your honor, and the debt will be honored in return." She didn't wait for a response. Mounting her horse, she rode back to the line, leaving me standing there with the bucket dripping water onto the parched ground. 6 days. It sounded like a sentence, a test I hadn't asked for. Betray them? The nearest village was a day's ride away, and the border patrols were sparse. I could slip out under cover of dark, ride hard, and bring back reinforcements. But something in her words, and in the silent vigil of her clan, held me back. Honor. What did that even mean in a world like this? The first day dragged on like an eternity. I repaired a section of fence that had sagged under the wind, hammering nails with deliberate strikes, aware of every eye on me. The orcs didn't move closer, but I felt their presence like a weight on my shoulders. By noon, a small bundle appeared at my gate. Dried meat, a skin of water, left without a word. A test? To see if I'd refuse it or poison it? I ate sparingly, saving most for my animals. Night fell, and I barred the door, lying awake on my pallet, listening to the wind. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams of old battles. The second day was much the same. I tended the horses, brushing their coats and checking their hooves for stones. The orcs remained vigilant, a few shifting positions, but never breaking formation. Another bundle arrived at midday, bread-like flat cakes, tough, but nourishing. I wondered about their motives. Were they feeding me to keep me alive for the test, or was it part of the debt? My mind raced with possibilities. What if I tried to signal for help? Light a signal fire? But the thought twisted in my gut. I'd given her water freely, and turning on them now felt like spitting on my own choice. By the third day, the routine had settled into a tense rhythm. I hauled more water, mended a leaking roof patch on the house, and even took time to weed the small plot where I grew hardy roots. The animals calmed somewhat, as if accepting the strange company. The orcs' gifts continued, fruits I'd never seen, preserved in some orcish way. I ate them, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and suspicion. That night, I sat by my fire, staring at the flames. Why hadn't I run? Fear of death? Maybe. But deeper down, it was about not becoming the monster the wars had tried to make me. I'd seen enough betrayal on the borders, humans selling out their own for orc gold, orcs ambushing under flags of truce. I wouldn't add to that. The fourth day brought a subtle shift. As I worked on sharpening my tools by the corral, I noticed a few orcs nodding faintly in my direction. Not approval, but acknowledgement. Lyra rode by once, her eyes lingering longer than before. No words, just that piercing gaze. The bundles grew more generous, a haunch of meat that smelled of spices unknown to human lands. I cooked it over my fire, the aroma filling the air, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of normalcy. But sleep still evaded me, my thoughts churning. What if the patrols came on their own? Would the orcs see it as my betrayal? On the fifth day, the weight pressed harder. I spent hours digging the well deeper, sweat soaking my shirt under the relentless sun. My muscles ached, but the work kept my mind occupied. The orcs watched, impassive. That evening, as I sat eating their latest offering, I pondered the debt Lyra mentioned. Was this their way of repaying the water, or testing if I'd exploit their presence? I realized then that staying wasn't just about survival, it was about proving to myself that one act of kindness didn't have to lead to regret. The sixth day dawned with a cooler breeze, hinting at change. I went through my chores mechanically, expecting the end. Mid-afternoon, Lyra returned, this time without the war paint, holding a silver grass branch, a talisman of some sort woven with intricate patterns. She dismounted and approached, her expression unreadable. "You could have run," she said plainly, "called your kin, sold us for safety. Why stay?" I set down my hammer, wiping sweat from my brow. Running would mean dying faster. Staying, it lets me keep my conscience clean. She nodded slowly, those golden eyes softening just a fraction. It was the first sign of respect I'd seen from her, from any orc. The branch in her hand gleamed, a symbol of her completed rite. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of the 6 days hanging between us. Then she turned, mounting her horse, and rode back. The test was over, but I knew the real challenges were just beginning. On the 6th day, a cooler breeze swept through the valley, carrying the faint scent of distant rain, though I knew better than to hope for it in this forsaken land. The sun rose as it always did, indifferent to the tension that had built over the past week. I went about my chores with a mechanical rhythm, my body aching from the constant strain of being watched. The orcs' circle remained unbroken, their silent vigil a constant reminder that my every move was judged. But there was a subtle shift in the air, like the end of a long storm approaching. Lyra's visit the day before, with her silver grass branch and that nod of respect, had left me feeling that perhaps I'd passed their test. Perhaps this would all end without blood. I was mending a loose plank on the corral fence when I heard the distant thunder of hooves, not the heavy, deliberate tread of orc steeds, but the lighter, faster rhythm of human riders. My hammer paused mid-swing. Squinting toward the southern ridge, I saw them, 6 riders cresting the hill, their silhouettes sharp against the morning sky. They wore the rough leather armor of border militia, long rifles slung across their backs, swords at their hips glinting in the light. Dust trailed behind them like a banner of warning. My stomach twisted. Rumors must have spread, whispers of orc sightings in the wastes carried by traders or scouts. In these parts, such talk brought swift response. The riders slowed as they approached my farm, fanning out in a loose formation that spoke of caution. Their leader, a grizzled man with a scarred cheek and a mustache like weathered straw, dismounted first. I recognized him vaguely. Captain Harlan, an old acquaintance from my guard days. He'd been a sergeant back then, quick with a blade and quicker with suspicions. The others stayed mounted, hands resting near their weapons, eyes scanning the horizon where the orcs waited unseen behind the rocky outcrops. "Corbin," Harlan called out, his voice rough as gravel. He strode toward me, boots crunching on the dry earth, his gaze flicking to the well and then back to my face. "Heard some troubling tales from the village. Orc tracks spotted near the wastes. Big group, they say. You seen anything?" I set down the hammer, wiping my hands on my trousers to buy a moment. My heart pounded like a war drum, but I kept my expression neutral. The orcs were out there, hidden just beyond the ridges, their presence a shadow over everything. If I told the truth, pointed them out, Harlan and his men would ride back for reinforcements and this valley would become a battlefield. Blood would soak the sand and I'd be the spark that ignited it. But lying outright, that could doom me too. If the orcs thought I'd betrayed them, my farm would be ashes by nightfall. "Just some old footprints in the sand," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. "Looked like a hunting party passing through, nothing fresh, nothing threatening. Could have been weeks old." Harlan's brow furrowed, his mustache twitching as he chewed on that. He glanced at his men, who shifted uneasily in their saddles. "Hunting party, eh? In these parts, orcs don't hunt quietly, Corbin. You know that from the old days. Mind if we take a look around?" It wasn't a request. Two of his riders dismounted, rifles in hand, and began poking around the edges of my property, checking the corral, peering into the house through the open door. My fists clenched at my sides. They were thorough, overturning a feed bucket, rifling through my tool shed. One of them, a young recruit with nervous eyes, called out, "Nothing here, Captain. Place looks clean." But Harlan wasn't satisfied. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Come on, man. We served together once. If there's orcs nearby, you tell me now, we'll handle it. You don't want them raiding your stock, or worse. Remember what they did to your family?" The words hit like a gut punch, stirring up the old rage I'd buried deep. My parents' screams, my sister's cries, they echoed in my mind. For a split second, I wavered. Pointing out the orcs would be justice, wouldn't it? Payback for the blood they'd spilled. But then I thought of Lyra, collapsing by my well, her golden eyes weighing me. I'd given her water freely, not for vengeance. Betraying her clan now would make me no better than the raiders who'd taken everything from me. Before I could respond, a low resonant horn blast echoed from the northern ridge. It was the orc signal, deep and ominous, like the rumble of thunder in the mountains. The militia froze. From the hills, figures emerged, orc warriors stepping into view, their armor catching the sun, axes and spears at the ready. Not charging, not yet, but the message was clear. Harlan's men whipped out their rifles, aiming toward the ridges, faces paling. "By the gods," Harlan muttered, drawing his sword. "How many? 100? 2? "More," I said quietly, stepping between him and the horizon. "Enough to end this before it starts." The young recruit's voice cracked. "Captain, we can't take that many. We're dead if they charge." Harlan's eyes blazed with fury, turning on me. "You knew! You bastard! You've been hiding them!" "I didn't hide anything," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. "They came because of something I did, something right. But if you start shooting, none of us walk away. Think, Harlan. 6 of you against a clan? That's suicide. Ride back, tell the village it's just scouts. No blood today." He hesitated, sword trembling in his grip. The orcs held their ground, a wall of green and steel, their horns silent now. The standoff stretched, the air thick with the promise of violence. One wrong move, a twitchy finger on a trigger, and the valley would erupt. I could see it in Harlan's eyes, the old hatred, the urge to fight, but survival won out. He sheathed his sword with a curse. "Fall back!" he barked to his men. "This ain't worth dying for today." They mounted up quickly, casting dark looks my way. Harlan lingered a moment longer, leaning close. "You've chosen sides, Corbin. Pray they don't turn on you like they did your kin." With that, they wheeled their horses and rode off, dust swirling in their wake. I stood there, legs weak, watching them disappear over the southern ridge. No shots fired, no arrows loosed, no blood spilled. The valley fell silent again, the orcs melting back into the hills as if they'd never been there. From the direction of the gate, a figure approached on foot. It was Lyra, her armor still gleaming, the silver grass branch tucked into her belt. She stopped a few paces away, her golden eyes locking onto mine. For a long moment she said nothing, then a subtle nod, deep, respectful, like a warrior acknowledging an equal. It was the most profound thanks an orc could give, I realized. No words needed. In that instant, I understood the weight of what I'd done. A small choice, not to betray, had averted a slaughter. It might not change the world, but in this valley, on this day, it had shifted fate. The borders were fragile, always one spark from war. Today I'd chosen to douse the flame, but as Lyra turned and walked away, I knew the consequences would follow. Choices like that came with a price, and mine was just beginning. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, the weight of the day settled over me like a heavy cloak. The militia's retreat had left an uneasy quiet, broken only by the occasional bleat of a goat or the rustle of wind through the dry grass. I stood by the gate, watching the dust from their horses fade into the horizon, my mind reeling from the choice I'd made. No blood spilled. That was a victory, small as it was. But victories in these lands often came with strings attached, and I knew the orcs wouldn't simply vanish now that the immediate threat was gone. I turned back toward the house, intending to check on the animals and perhaps eat something to steady my nerves. But before I could take more than a few steps, a figure emerged from the northern ridge, the older orc in the red cloak, the one I'd pegged as their chief from the start. He moved with deliberate purpose, his scarred face impassive, the cloak billowing behind him like a banner of authority. Behind him, a small escort of warriors followed at a respectful distance, but he waved them back as he approached my door. He didn't knock. The door creaked open under his massive hand, and he stepped inside without invitation, filling the small space with his presence. I followed him in, closing the door behind me, the air inside suddenly thick with tension. The chief, Lyra's father, I assumed, stood in the center of the room, his golden eyes scanning the sparse furnishings, the rough-hewn table, the pallet bed, the flickering lantern I'd lit earlier. He said nothing at first, just reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew an object. An ancient stone circlet carved with intricate runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. It was no mere trinket. Even I, with my limited knowledge of orc lore, could sense its power. Symbols of protection, wards against harm, etched deep into the dark rock. He placed it on the table with a soft thud, his voice rumbling like distant thunder when he finally spoke. His accent was thicker than Lyra's, the words deliberate and heavy. "This is the Circle of Stone. Wear it, and the Stone Grey clan will never raise a hand against you. Our axes will turn aside, our arrows will miss. You will walk our lands as kin, unbound by blood but bound by oath." I stared at the circlet, its surface cool and unyielding. It was a gift, but one laced with implications. "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in assessment. "Then the debt is unpaid, but more. You wear it and you stand between worlds. Not fully human to your kind, not orc to ours. Villages will whisper traitor. Clans will watch with suspicion. You choose isolation, perhaps enmity from both sides." The words hung in the air, echoing my own thoughts. I'd already felt the sting of Harlan's accusation, the way his men had looked at me like I'd crossed an invisible line. Wearing this would make it permanent, a mark of the outsider, the man who'd chosen mercy over loyalty to his own. The borders were harsh. People here didn't forgive those who blurred the lines. I'd be shunned by the villages, maybe even hunted if rumors twisted far enough. And the orcs? They might honor the circlet, but trust? That was another matter. I'd be a human bearing their symbol, a walking reminder of debts and uneasy alliances. I picked up the circlet, feeling its weight in my hands, surprisingly light for stone, yet heavy with meaning. Memories flooded me. The raids that took my family, the endless patrols where I'd seen good men die for nothing but old hatreds. I'd walked away from that life to find peace, but peace had found me in the form of a dying orc by my well. Giving her water had been instinct, a refusal to let the wasteland claim another life. Betraying her clan today would have undone that, turned me into the very thing I'd fled. But accepting this, it meant embracing the cost, living on the edge, neither here nor there. I choose to wear it, I said, slipping the circlet over my wrist. It fit perfectly, the runes warming against my skin as if acknowledging the bond. I'll keep my conscience. If the price is standing between two worlds, I'll pay it. The chief nodded once, a grave gesture that carried the weight of centuries-old traditions. Honor weighs heavier than blood, he rumbled, his voice laced with approval. It was an orc proverb, I realized, one I'd heard whispered during my guard days, a reminder that true strength came from choices, not lineage. He turned then, striding out the door without another word, his cloak swirling as he rejoined his warriors on the ridge. Outside, Lyra waited by the gate, her massive frame silhouetted against the fading light. She didn't approach, but her golden eyes met mine across the distance, holding my gaze for a long moment. There was relief in that look, a subtle easing of the tension she'd carried since our first encounter. She'd been the one to fall, to owe the debt, and now it was squared, not with gold or favors, but with mutual respect. She raised a hand in farewell, then turned and walked away, her steps sure and unhurried. As the chief and his escort melted back into the hills, I stood alone in the doorway, the circlet a new weight on my arm. The valley felt emptier, yet heavier, with the choices I'd made. Honor over sides. That was the path I'd chosen. But in these lands, such paths were lonely, fraught with unseen dangers. The sun set, and I wondered what shadows it would bring. A few weeks passed in a blur of routine and lingering tension. The valley returned to its harsh, unforgiving self, the sun baking the earth, the wind whipping sand into every crevice, the well yielding just enough water to sustain me and my animals. The Orc clan's departure had been swift and silent. One morning, I woke to find the ridges empty, their banners gone, only faint tracks in the red dust marking where hundreds of warriors had stood. The bundles of food they'd left during the vigil were the last traces of their presence, and I rationed them carefully, mixing the spiced meats with my own meager stores. The goats and horses seemed relieved, grazing more calmly now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted under my feet. The circlet on my wrist was a constant reminder. It didn't weigh much physically, but its presence was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. The runes etched into the stone caught the light oddly at times, almost glowing when the sun hit them just right. I caught myself rubbing it absent-mindedly during chores, tracing the ancient symbols that promised protection from one side while inviting suspicion from the other. Honor heavier than blood, the chief had said. I pondered those words often, wondering if I'd truly understood the cost when I slipped it on. It wasn't long before the consequences came knocking, literally. One afternoon, as I was repairing a section of roof that had sagged under a rare dust storm, I heard the familiar thunder of human hooves approaching from the south. 6 riders again, the same militia group led by Captain Harlan. They rode in tight formation, rifles at the ready, their faces set in grim determination. I set down my tools and walked to the gate, standing tall despite the knot in my stomach. This time, there were no orcs to back me up. I was alone, marked by my choice. Harlan dismounted first, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the circlet glinting on my arm. Well, well, he drawled, spitting into the dust. Looks like you've gone full trader now. What's that, some orc bauble? They pay you in trinkets for selling out your own? The others murmured agreement, hands hovering near their weapons. One of them, the young recruit from before, looked uneasy, his gaze flicking between me and the empty ridges. I didn't flinch or argue. What was there to say? I'd known this would come. The whispers in the villages, the sidelong glances from traders who'd pass by. Humans here didn't forget old wounds. The raids, the lost families, they festered like open sores. Wearing the circlet was like painting a target on my back, declaring I'd chosen mercy over vengeance. I haven't sold anyone out, I said calmly, meeting Harlan's glare. That clan's gone. No threat here. He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed across the valley. Gone? Or waiting? You're marked now, Corbin. Betrayer. Folks in town are talking. Say you let them camp here, fed them secrets. If it were up to me, we'd burn this place down and drag you back for questioning. The threat hung in the air, but they didn't move. The young recruit shifted uncomfortably. Captain, maybe we should just report it. No sign of orcs now. Harlan's face twisted in disgust, but he held back. Perhaps it was the memory of their last visit, the overwhelming numbers they'd faced, or maybe, deep down, he knew torching my farm wouldn't change anything. After a long, tense stare down, he mounted up. "You're on your own now, traitor. Don't come crawling to the village when they turn on you." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a bitter taste in my mouth. I stood there watching them go, my heart pounding, but a strange lightness settling in. It was like emerging from a long fever, weak, but clearer-headed. They hadn't burned anything, hadn't even drawn weapons. The circlet had done its work, not just as protection from orcs, but as a symbol that forced others to hesitate. I wasn't one of them anymore, but that isolation felt freeing. No more pretending to fit into a world of endless grudges. Life continued in its sparse way. I deepened the well a bit more, coaxing extra water from the earth. The goats produced a kid or two, a small miracle in the drought. Traders still passed by occasionally, but their visits grew shorter, their eyes lingering on the circlet with suspicion. One even refused to barter, muttering about orc lovers under his breath. I let it slide. Solitude suited me better now. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with reflections on what I'd done. A single gourd of water, given without thought, had rippled out to change everything. No war sparked that day, no valley soaked in blood. One choice, small as it was, had preserved a fragile peace on the border. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in fiery reds, I spotted a figure on the northern ridge. It was Lyra, alone, her massive silhouette unmistakable against the dying light. She didn't approach, just stood there, gazing down at the valley, my farm, the well, the animals grazing peacefully. For a moment our eyes met across the distance. She raised a hand, a broad palm, in a simple wave of farewell. I returned the gesture, nodding once. There was no need for words. The debt was settled, the respect mutual. She turned then, disappearing into the hills, likely for the last time. I knew we might never cross paths again. Her clan had their rights, their territories far from human eyes. But the circlet ensured no orc would harm me, not out of fear but out of honor for the choice I'd made. On the human side, the whispers would continue, the isolation deepen. I was between worlds now, belonging to neither, but that limbo felt right. In a land thirsty for blood, I'd chosen to give water instead. It cost me alliances, perhaps safety, but it preserved something more vital, my humanity. As the stars emerged overhead, I sat by my fire, the circlet warm on my wrist. The wasteland stretched endless around me, harsh and unyielding, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in it. Kindness had a real price, higher than hatred, steeper than revenge. Yet paying it had kept me whole. Between the bloodiest places, I'd chosen to offer drink to another, and that was how I held on to my soul.